Let me tell you about the Sunday that changed my life forever. Not because something miraculous happened, but because I finally saw the truth I'd been blind to for months. I'm the kind of man who believes in preparation. Always have been. Whether it's keeping emergency cash in the safe, maintaining my truck so it won't break down, or simply knowing where the exits are in any room I enter. Call it paranoia if you want. I call it wisdom earned through experience. That particular Sunday started like any other. Coffee at 6:30, black, no sugar. The morning news playing low while I planned out the day. Football at 1, maybe grill some steaks later. Simple pleasures for a simple man, or so I thought. Sarah had been acting strange for weeks. The kind of strange that makes a man's gut tighten, though he can't quite put his finger on why. Extra shopping trips that yielded few purchases. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. A distance in her eyes that hadn't been there in our 7 years of marriage. I'd married Sarah because she was steady, reliable. She taught 3rd grade, coached Little League on weekends, and made the best apple pie in 3 counties. We weren't passionate lovers burning up the sheets every night, but we were partners, or so I believed. The coffee was still hot in my mug when I heard her key in the lock. Too early for church to be over, too early for anything, really. Then I heard voices, her nervous laugh and a deeper voice I didn't recognize. "Just relax," the unfamiliar voice said. "It's time he knew anyway." That's when my blood went cold. Not because I didn't understand what was happening, but because I understood it perfectly. The pieces I'd been trying to ignore for 2 months suddenly formed a complete picture. They walked into the living room like they owned the place. Sarah looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap, but there was something else in her expression. Relief, maybe, or anticipation. The man beside her was younger than me by at least 10 years, with the kind of cocky smile that said he'd never faced real consequences for anything in his life. Designer jeans, expensive watch, hair styled with too much product. He looked me up and down like he was measuring me for a coffin. "David," Sarah started, her voice artificially bright. "This is David. We need to talk." David stepped forward, extending his hand with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "Hey there, David. Sarah's told me so much about you." I looked at his outstretched hand like it was holding a snake. "I'll bet she has." He dropped his hand, but not his smile. "Look, I know this is awkward, but we're all adults here. Sarah and I have been seeing each other, and we think it's time to make things official. She's going to be moving in with me." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing weekend plans, told me everything I needed to know about his character. This wasn't a man tortured by guilt or conflicted about breaking up a marriage. This was a man who took what he wanted and expected the world to adjust around him. Is that so? I set my coffee mug down carefully on the side table. "And when exactly did you two decide this?" Sarah shot David a look I couldn't quite read, but he was too busy enjoying his moment of triumph to notice. "Well, it's been building for a while now," he said, rocking back on his heels. "Sometimes these things just happen, you know. Chemistry can't be denied." That's when something shifted inside me. The last 2 months of surveillance reports, bank records, and private investigators' photos crystallized into perfect clarity. They thought they were delivering shocking news to a naive husband. They had no idea they were walking into a trap I'd spent 8 weeks preparing. "Chemistry," I repeated slowly. "Like the chemistry at the Marriott on 5th Street? Or maybe the kind you had at that little cabin outside Millerville?" David's smile faltered for the first time. Sarah went pale. "How did you—" she started. "Shut the hell up," I told David, whose mouth had opened to speak. "You've said enough." I stood up and walked toward the cabinet where I kept my important papers. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath and David's nervous shuffle. They were finally beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. "You want to make things official?" I asked, opening the cabinet door. "Let's make things official." 2 months earlier, I'd been a different man. A trusting man. The kind of fool who believed that 7 years of marriage meant something, that vows spoken in front of God and family carried weight beyond the ceremony itself. The first sign was so subtle I almost missed it. Sarah had always been punctual, teacher's habit, she called it. But suddenly she was running late from errands that should have taken 30 minutes. Traffic was terrible, she'd say, or, I ran into Jenny at the store and we got to talking. Innocent explanations, believable explanations, until they started happening 3 times a week. Then came the phone calls. Sarah had never been secretive about her phone before. It would ring, she'd answer it in front of me, put it on speaker if it was her mother or sister. But now she was stepping onto the porch to take calls, claiming they were from work or about the church fundraiser. The final straw was the credit card statement. Sarah had always been careful with money. It was one of the things I loved about her. But there were charges I didn't recognize. Restaurants we'd never been to. A hotel charge on a day she'd claimed to be visiting her sick aunt in Cleveland. I'm not a naturally suspicious man, but I'm not stupid either. When you've been married to someone for 7 years, you know their patterns. And Sarah's patterns had changed completely. That's when I called Jenkins and Associates, a private investigation firm downtown. The receptionist was professional, discreet. She scheduled me an appointment for the following Tuesday. Michael Jenkins was a former police detective, probably in his 50s, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. His office was sparse, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that had seen better days. Cheating spouse? He asked before I even sat down. I hope not, I said, though we both knew why I was there. He quoted me a daily rate that made me wince, but I nodded anyway. How long does something like this usually take? Depends on how careful they're being. If they're amateurs, and most are, we'll have what you need within 2 weeks. If they're smart about it, might take a month. They weren't smart about it. The first report arrived by encrypted email 4 days later. Photos of Sarah's car at the Marriott downtown at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, the same Tuesday she told me she was meeting her principal about curriculum changes. Time-stamped photos of her walking into the hotel lobby with a man I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I scrolled through the images. There was my wife of 7 years, smiling at another man the way she used to smile at me. His hand on the small of her back as they entered the elevator. The casual intimacy of people comfortable with each other. The second report was worse. They'd gotten careless, or maybe more brazen. Dinners at expensive restaurants across town, a weekend at a bed and breakfast in the mountains. The same weekend, Sarah had claimed to be at a teaching conference in Columbus. By the 3rd week, I had enough evidence to end my marriage 10 times over. But I kept paying Jenkins, because I needed to know everything. How long it had been going on, how serious it was, whether she was planning to leave me or just having her fun on the side. The answer came in week 6. Jenkins called me directly this time. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "I think you need to see this." We met at a diner outside town. He slid a manila envelope across the table without saying a word. Inside were photographs, but also printed text messages that his tech guy had recovered from Sarah's cloud backup. The messages told the whole story. Sarah wasn't just having an affair, she was planning her exit strategy, discussion of when we can finally be together, David talking about the condo he was buying, how they'd furnish it together, Sarah asking about the timeline for me finding out, whether they should tell me together or if she should do it alone. The messages revealed the affair had been going on for 2 months, starting right around the time I'd first noticed her behavioral changes. They'd been careful at first, meeting only once a week, but by the 2nd month, they were seeing each other 3 times a week, spending entire afternoons together while I was at work. The final message was dated just 3 days earlier. "I think Sunday would be perfect. He's always mellow on Sundays. We'll go over together and get it done." I read that message 3 times before its full meaning sank in. They weren't just planning to tell me about the affair. They were planning to ambush me with it, probably expecting me to fall apart or beg them to reconsider. That night, I called my lawyer. Richard Weiss had handled my business contracts for years. He was expensive, thorough, and discreet. When I explained the situation, he didn't waste time with condolences or moral judgments. Pennsylvania is a no-fault state, he said, but adultery can still impact property division, especially if marital assets were used to fund the affair. He walked me through my options. With Sarah's teacher salary and my contracting business, the house would likely be the biggest asset to divide. But if I could prove she'd been using our joint accounts to fund hotel stays and dinners with her lover, that could work in my favor. "How much documentation do you have?" he asked. "Everything," I told him. "Dates, times, locations, credit card statements, photos, text messages, everything." "Good," he said. "Give me a week to prepare the papers. And David, don't let on that you know anything. The element of surprise is your biggest advantage right now." By Friday, I had signed divorce papers sitting in my safe, along with copies of every piece of evidence Jenkins had collected. The bank accounts were protected. I'd moved our joint savings into a separate account that required both signatures to access. The house, thankfully, was in my name only, bought with money I'd inherited from my grandfather. Saturday night, I sat in my kitchen reviewing everything one more time. Photos, messages, bank statements, legal documents. 2 months of careful preparation reduced to a stack of papers that would end my marriage. Sunday morning, I made coffee and waited. According to their text messages, they'd be here by 9:30. I was ready. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as I pulled it from the cabinet. 7 years of marriage, 2 months of investigation, and countless sleepless nights. All of it reduced to a single folder containing the end of everything I'd thought I knew about my life. "David," Sarah said, her voice higher than usual. "What's that?" David had finally stopped smiling. Something in my expression must have warned him that his victory lap was premature. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I walked back to my chair and sat down, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. Both of them stared at it like it might explode. "You know what I realized about 2 months ago?" I said conversationally. "I realized I'd gotten complacent, stopped paying attention to details, stopped asking the right questions." Sarah's hand found David's arm, gripping it tight enough that her knuckles went white. He looked down at her fingers, then back at me, and I saw the first real flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "So I started paying attention again," I continued. "Amazing what you can learn when you actually look." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph. Sarah at the Marriott, walking hand in hand with David toward the elevator. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. "That's from October 15th, I said, setting the photo on the table. "The day you told me you were meeting with Principal Harrison about the new math curriculum." David stared at the photo, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and something approaching panic. "How did you—" "Oh, there's more," I said, pulling out another photo. "Here you are leaving the Riverside Inn last weekend. The same weekend you were supposedly at that teaching conference in Columbus." I laid out photo after photo, each one more damning than the last. Sarah had sunk onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. David remained standing, but his cocky posture had dissolved into something much less confident. "You want to know what really impressed me?" I asked, pulling out the printed text messages. "Your planning skills. Very thorough." I read David's words back to him. "I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. The condo will be perfect for us." I looked up at him. "Nice place, by the way. I drove by last week." The color drained from David's face completely. He'd finally grasped that this wasn't a shocked husband learning devastating news. This was a prepared man revealing how thoroughly he'd been watching them. "And Sarah," I said, turning to my wife, "I particularly enjoyed this one. He's so clueless. I almost feel bad for him." She looked up at me through her tears, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before she'd decided that our life together wasn't worth preserving. "David, please," she whispered. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I pulled out the hotel receipts, the restaurant bills, the credit, card statements showing charges at places we'd never been together. "Because it looks like you've been using our joint account to fund your affair for the past 2 months. David finally found his voice. "Look, man, we didn't mean for it to happen this way." "You didn't mean to get caught," I corrected. "There's a difference." I reached into the envelope one final time and pulled out the divorce papers Richard had prepared. Pre-signed, notarized, ready to file. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You're free to go, Sarah, both of you, but you're not getting a single penny from me." Sarah's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know about the money you've been spending on hotels and fancy dinners. I know about the jewelry you bought him with our credit card. I know about all of it." I tapped the stack of evidence. Pennsylvania law is very clear about dissipation of marital assets. David was backing toward the door now, finally understanding that he'd walked into something far beyond his ability to handle. Whatever fantasy he'd had about a smooth transition, from secret lover to live-in boyfriend, was crumbling in real time. "This is crazy," he muttered. "Sarah, tell him—" "Tell me what?" I asked. "That you love each other? That this is real? That you're sorry it had to end this way?" I shook my head. "Save it for someone who doesn't have 2 months of surveillance footage." David looked at Sarah, then at the evidence spread across my coffee table, then back at Sarah. I watched his mental calculation play out across his face. No money, no easy transition, no naive husband to manipulate. Just consequences he'd never bothered to consider. I need to go," he said. Sarah's face went ashen. "David, wait." But he was already moving toward the door. "This is too complicated, Sarah. I didn't sign up for this kind of drama." He practically ran out the door, didn't even look back. The sound of his car starting and pulling away filled the sudden silence. Sarah stared at the closed door for a long moment, as if expecting him to come back. When she finally turned to me, her face was streaked with tears and something that might have been genuine regret. "He pressured me," she said desperately. "I didn't know what I was doing. He said he loved me, that we could have a real future together." "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop." I gathered the photos and documents back into the envelope, my movements, deliberate and final. "You made your choice, Sarah. You made it every time you lied to me, every time you met him at that hotel, every time you spent our money on your affair. And he just made his choice too." She was crying harder now, but I felt nothing. The man who might have been moved by her tears had died somewhere in the past 2 months, killed by surveillance photos and text messages planning my humiliation. "You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry," I said, standing up. "After that, I'm changing the locks." The sound of Sarah's footsteps on the stairs felt like a countdown to freedom. Each step marking the end of a life built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. I remained in the living room, listening to drawers, opening and closing, hangers scraping against the closet rod, the soft thud of items being thrown into what I assumed was a suitcase. 7 years of marriage reduced to whatever she could fit in 30 minutes. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Weiss. "Papers ready to file Monday morning. Let me know when you're ready to proceed." I typed back, "Proceed." That was it. No emotion, no second thoughts, just the practical execution of a plan I'd spent 2 months perfecting. "David!" Sarah called from upstairs, her voice thick with tears. "Please, can we talk about this?" 25 minutes, I called back without looking up from my phone. The desperation in her voice might have affected me once. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd built a life with, was upstairs crying and begging for another chance. But that woman had been an illusion, carefully maintained right up until she'd walked through my door with her lover, expecting me to crumble at their feet. She appeared at the top of the stairs carrying a single suitcase and a duffel bag. Even from downstairs, I could see how little she'd been able to pack. A few clothes, some cosmetics, the jewelry I'd given her over the years, though notably not the expensive necklace she'd bought for herself with our credit card last month. "This is insane," she said, making her way down slowly, as if delaying the inevitable might somehow change the outcome. "You can't just throw away 7 years of marriage." "I'm not throwing it away," I replied without looking at her. "You already did that." She set her bags by the front door and turned to face me, her makeup smeared, her hair disheveled. For a moment, she looked like the young teacher I'd married, vulnerable and uncertain. "What about the house?" she asked. "My things. Our friends?" "Your things will be donated to charity if you don't arrange to pick them up within the week. As for our friends," I shrugged. "I suppose they'll choose sides. Should be interesting to see who ends up where once they know what you've been doing." The cruelty of that statement surprised even me. But watching her face crumple, I realized I'd passed some invisible line during the past 2 months. The man who'd once protected her feelings was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that kindness was just another word for vulnerability. "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. "You should have thought of that before you decided David was your future," I said. "Speaking of which, where is your future? Shouldn't he be here helping you move into his condo?" We both knew the answer to that. David had revealed his true character the moment things got complicated, abandoning her the instant he realized there would be no financial windfall, no easy transition to domestic bliss funded by her divorce. "Settlement." "He'll come around," she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. "He just needs time to process all this." I almost laughed. "Sarah, he ran out of here like the building was on fire. Men like David don't come around when there's nothing in it for them." She tried one more approach, the last desperate gambit of someone who'd run out of options. "What if I contest the divorce? What if I hire a lawyer and fight this?" "With what money?" I asked. "Our joint accounts are frozen pending the divorce settlement. Your teacher's salary won't cover a lawyer capable of handling a case this complicated, especially not with the evidence I have." I could see the exact moment when the full scope of her situation hit her. No money, no lover, no home, and no legal recourse. The affair that was supposed to be her escape from ordinary life had become a trap that cost her everything. 15 minutes, I said, checking my phone. She picked up her bags with hands that shook slightly. At the door, she turned back one final time. "I did love you," she said. "I want you to know that." "Maybe you did," I replied, "but not enough." After she left, I sat in the quiet house for a long time. The space felt different already, not empty, exactly, but clean. Like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. I called a locksmith and scheduled him for that evening. Then I opened a beer, even though it wasn't yet noon, and raised it in a silent toast to the man I'd been 2 months ago. The trusting fool who'd believed in marriage vows and partnership and the basic decency of the woman he'd chosen to build a life with. That man was gone now, and I found I didn't miss him as much as I'd expected to. 3 months later, I was drinking my Sunday morning coffee in blessed silence when my phone buzzed with a text from Jenkins, the private investigator. We'd kept in touch. Professional curiosity, he called it, though I suspected he'd grown genuinely invested in seeing how the story ended. "Your ex-wife's boyfriend," the message read. "Thought you'd want to know. He's engaged to someone else, 22-year-old from his office. Wedding's next month." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some information you don't need to verify to know it's true. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks ago. Sarah hadn't contested it, couldn't afford to, as I'd predicted. She'd signed everything Richard put in front of her and walked away with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage. Nothing. The house was mine, bought with my grandfather's money years before I'd met her. The business was mine, built with my hands and my reputation. The savings account was mine, minus the $2,000 she'd spent on her 2-month affair, which Richard had meticulously documented and deducted from any settlement she might have claimed. She'd moved in with her sister across town, taken a second job waitressing weekends to make ends meet. I knew this not because I was keeping tabs on her, but because it's impossible to avoid hearing things in a town this size. People talk, especially when a marriage ends the way ours had. David, as I'd predicted, had ghosted her the minute he realized. There was no money coming, no house to move into, no established life to slide into, no financial cushion to make their transition comfortable. Just a woman with nothing to offer except the chaos of a messy divorce and a reputation for betraying the people who trusted her. I'd seen her once, about a month ago, at the grocery store. She'd looked tired, older somehow, wearing the kind of forced smile people put on when they're determined not to let the world see how badly they've fallen. She'd nodded at me across the produce section, a careful acknowledgement that held no warmth, and asked for none in return. I'd nodded back and continued shopping. There was nothing left to say between us. The strangest thing about the whole experience was how quickly I'd adapted to being alone again. The house stayed cleaner, the bills were lower. I ate what I wanted, watched what I wanted, made plans without consulting anyone. The life Sarah had been so eager to escape turned out to be exactly the life I'd wanted all along, just without the pretense of sharing it with someone who didn't appreciate it. My Sunday routine had evolved into something I genuinely looked forward to. Coffee at 6:30, newspaper spread across the kitchen table, football in the afternoon if I felt like it. Sometimes I'd fire up the grill and cook a steak just for myself, taking my time, seasoning it exactly how I liked it. Friends had tried to set me up with women, divorced teachers from Sarah's old school, daughters of business associates, neighbors, sisters visiting from out of town. I'd gone on a few dates, pleasant enough conversations over dinner or coffee, but nothing that made me want to risk building another life with someone else. You can't give up on love because of one bad experience. My friend Tom had said last week, pushing yet another blind date my way, but that wasn't what I'd done. I hadn't given up on love. I'd simply learned the difference between love and convenience, between partnership and performance, between building something together and having someone take what you'd built. Sarah had taught me that trust wasn't something you gave away freely. It was something you earned through consistent actions over time, something you proved through choices made when no one was watching. She'd failed that test spectacularly, but the lesson remained valuable. The coffee was getting cold in my mug, but I wasn't ready to move yet. Sunday mornings had become sacred to me. Not in a religious sense, but in the way that quiet moments become precious when you've learned not to take them for granted. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tom, probably calling to follow up on yesterday's conversation about his wife's cousin who was perfect for me. I let it go to voicemail. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up slowly. Kids riding bikes in driveways, couples walking dogs, the comfortable rhythms of domestic life continuing around me. Once, I'd been part of that world, playing the role of husband in a marriage I'd thought was solid. Now I watched it from the outside and found that the view was clearer from here. The truth Sarah never understood was that I hadn't needed her to complete me. I'd wanted her, enjoyed building a life with her, appreciated having someone to share both the daily routines and the bigger dreams. But I'd been whole before she came along, and I was whole again now that she was gone. The difference was that now I knew the value of my own company. The peace of a Sunday morning without drama, without lies, without the exhausting work of loving someone who was systematically betraying that love. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and looked out at the day ahead. No plans, no obligations, no one to answer to but myself. It wasn't the life I'd planned at 25, but it was exactly the life I wanted at 35. Some people might call that settling. I called it winning. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.